February 16, 1945. A Zero explodes at 25,000 feet over Tokyo. The pilot never sees what kills him. 1 second, he is climbing toward a formation of B-29 bombers. The next second, 6.50 caliber machine guns pour 120 rounds into his unarmored fuselage. The fuel tank ruptures. Flames swallow the cockpit. The aircraft disintegrates before it falls 1,000 feet. And the American fighter that killed him is already gone, climbing back into the sun at 450 miles per hour. Untouchable, unreachable, impossible. Because according to every calculation the Japanese military has made, that American fighter cannot be here. Not over Tokyo. Not 660 nautical miles from the nearest American base. Not escorting bombers over the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific. The mathematics say it is impossible. But the mathematics are wrong. And before this day ends, 10 Japanese pilots will die learning exactly how wrong. This is the story of how a silver American fighter, built in 117 days by a company that had never designed a world-class aircraft, crossed an ocean that should have been too wide, fought over a city that should have been too far, and destroyed Japan's ability to defend its own sky. The kill ratio by war's end will reach 36-1. 36 Japanese fighters shot down for every P-51 lost in air combat. That number is not propaganda. That number is mathematics. And mathematics does not lie. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to when America was losing the air war over Japan. Back to when B-29 crews drew up their wills before every mission. Back to when Japanese pilots laughed at American fighters and called them fat, slow, predictable. Back to December 1944, when the bomber crews of the 21st Bomber Command faced a nightmare that no amount of courage could solve. The B-29 Superfortress was supposed to win the war. The most expensive weapons program in American history, more costly than the Manhattan Project that built the atomic bomb. Each aircraft cost $639,000 more than a Navy destroyer. 4 massive Wright R3350 engines, producing 2,200 horsepower each. Pressurized cabin. Remote-controlled gun turrets. A technological marvel that could fly 5,000 miles and drop 7 tons of bombs from 30,000 feet. America built 3,970 of them, because American industrial capacity bordered on the absurd. The B-29 was invincible on paper. Reality told a different story. December 1944. The 21st Bomber Command launches raid after raid against Japanese industrial targets from bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. The bombers fly at 30,000 feet above the effective ceiling of most Japanese fighters, above the accurate range of most anti-aircraft guns. They should be untouchable. They are not. Japanese pilots have developed a tactic born of desperation and extraordinary courage. They climb for 40 minutes in their Zero's engines, gasping in the thin air at the edge of their operational ceiling. They arrive at bomber altitude with nearly empty fuel tanks. 1 pass, maybe 2. Then they dive for home before their engines starve. It should not work. It works devastatingly. The loss rate hits 5.1% per mission. For every 100 bombers that fly to Japan, 5 do not come back. Each B-29 carries 11 crew members. 5% means 5 aircraft, 55 men every single mission. A crew assigned 35 missions faces statistical certainty of death. Not probability. Certainty. The math is simple and merciless. A 5.1% loss rate across 35 missions means a crew has a 16% chance of completing their tour alive. 84% chance of death. The bomber crews know this. They calculate it in their bunks at night. They write letters home with the careful words of men who expect to die. And the worst part is that the bombing is not even working. At 30,000 feet, the jet stream over Japan reaches speeds of 200 miles per hour. Bombs released from that altitude drift miles off target. Precision bombing becomes random bombardment. Factories survive. Production continues. American crews die for nothing. The generals know it. The crews know it. Everyone knows it. But no one has a solution, because the solution requires fighter escort, and fighter escort over Tokyo is impossible. The nearest American fighter base is in the Marianas, 1,500 miles from Tokyo. No single-engine fighter in any nation's inventory possesses that range. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's heavy fighter, has a combat radius of 800 miles with drop tanks. Not enough. The P-38 Lightning can stretch to 100 miles. Still not enough. The ocean between the Marianas and Japan is an impassable moat of salt water, and Japanese strategists count on this moat the way medieval kings counted on castle walls. Their home islands are beyond the reach of American fighters. The bombers must come alone, and alone they can be killed. But everything is about to change because of one aircraft that almost never existed, and one engine that was never supposed to be installed in it. 1940. The British Purchasing Commission approaches North American aviation with a simple request: build P-40 Warhawks under license for the Royal Air Force. North American's President James Dutch Kindleberger makes a counter-proposal that borders on arrogance. Give us 120 days. We will design something better. The British are skeptical. North American aviation has never built a frontline fighter. They build trainers. The T-6 Texan, a fine aircraft for teaching cadets irrelevant for combat. But the British are desperate. France has fallen. Britain stands alone. They agree. North American completes the prototype in 117 days. They call it the NA-73X. The Army Air Corps designates it P-51 Mustang. It is sleek, fast, and equipped with a laminar flow wing that reduces drag to levels that make aerodynamicists blink in disbelief. There is one problem: the engine. The original Allison FIV 1710 performs adequately at low altitude. Above 15,000 feet, it loses power like a sprinter losing breath. The P-51 with the Allison engine is a mediocre fighter, fast down low, gasping up high. Useful for ground attack, useless for the high-altitude combat that decides air superiority. The aircraft sits in limbo. A beautiful airframe chained to an inadequate engine. Then a British test pilot named Ronald Harker flies the Mustang and recognizes its potential. He writes a report that changes the war. Put a Merlin in it. The Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 series engine. Two-stage, two-speed supercharger. The engine that made the Spitfire legendary. Packard Manufacturing in Detroit licenses the design, produces it as the V1650. When engineers mate the Merlin to the Mustang airframe, something extraordinary happens. Speed jumps to 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling reaches 41,900 feet. And range, the characteristic that will change everything, extends beyond 1,600 miles with external tanks. The P-51D Mustang with the Packard-Merlin engine becomes the finest propeller-driven fighter aircraft ever built. Not because it turns the tightest. The Zero does that. Not because it is the fastest in a straight line. The Me-262 jet is faster. But because it combines speed, range, climb rate, firepower, and survivability in a package that no other aircraft on Earth can match. It is the first fighter that can fly from England to Berlin and back. It will soon become the first fighter that can fly from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back. But first, someone has to capture Iwo Jima. February 1945. Iwo Jima is an 8-square-mile volcanic island that smells like sulfur and looks like the surface of the moon. It sits 660 nautical miles south of Tokyo, exactly within P-51 range. The Marines invade on February 19th. The battle will last 36 days and kill nearly 7,000 Americans and 18,000 Japanese. It is among the bloodiest engagements in Marine Corps history. But even before the fighting ends, before the famous flag is raised on Mount Suribachi, Navy construction battalions carve runways from the volcanic ash. And on those runways, P-51 Mustangs begin to arrive. The Japanese do not know what is coming. Lieutenant Colonel Tadashi Nakajima sits at Narimasu Airfield outside Tokyo and reads an intelligence report that claims American escort fighters have been spotted near Iwo Jima. He laughs. Nakajima is a veteran. He has flown Zeros since 1942 over the Solomons, the Philippines, Formosa. He knows American fighters. They are heavy fast in a dive, helpless in a turning fight. They burn easily, and they absolutely cannot reach Tokyo from any base the Americans currently hold. The report is wrong. It must be wrong. The mathematics are clear. On the morning of February 16, 1945, 72 P-51 Mustangs from the 15th, 21st, and 506th Fighter Groups take off from Iwo Jima's half-finished runway, threading between artillery impacts and supply trucks, while Marines fight and die 1,000 yards away. Each aircraft carries 269 gallons of internal fuel and 165 gallons in 2 external drop tanks. Total fuel load, 434 gallons. Burn rate at cruise power, 70 gallons per hour. Endurance, 6 hours. Mission profile allows 3.5 hours to Tokyo, 15 minutes over target, 3.5 hours return. Reserve fuel, 30 minutes. Margin for error, 0. Captain Robert W. Moore checks his fuel gauges one final time in his P-51D, nicknamed Contrary Mary. He has flown Mustangs since August 1944 in Europe. He knows the aircraft intimately. He also knows the mission mathematics. Every pound of fuel matters. Every minute of combat maneuvering burns gasoline at 3 times cruise rate. Fight too long over Tokyo, and you swim home. The Pacific Ocean does not negotiate. At 12:15 hours, the formation passes the point of no return. Fuel remaining exceeds fuel required to return by less than 10 minutes. They are committed. 660 miles of open ocean behind them. Tokyo ahead. And waiting above Tokyo, Lieutenant Colonel Nakajima and 23 Zero pilots who still believe American fighters cannot possibly be here. They are about to learn otherwise. In Part 2, we will witness the 14 minutes of aerial combat that shattered Japanese air defense doctrine forever. Nakajima will fire his 20mm cannon at a P-51 and watch in stunned disbelief as the American fighter simply accelerates away, climbing at an angle his Zero cannot match. 10 of his 23 pilots will die, and Captain Moore will face a nightmare of his own, watching his fuel gauges drop toward 0 over 660 miles of empty ocean, calculating the exact minute his engine will quit, knowing the Pacific does not forgive mathematical errors. The battle over Tokyo has not yet begun, but the mathematics that will decide it are already absolute. 72 P-51 Mustangs cross the point of no return over the Pacific. Fuel for 6 hours. Distance to Tokyo, 3.5 hours. Distance back, 3.5 hours. Reserve 30 minutes. Margin for error, 0. Captain Robert Moore and 71 other pilots had committed themselves to a mission that every Japanese strategist declared impossible. In Part 1, we watched them launch from a half-finished runway on Iwo Jima, while Marines bled and died 1,000 yards away. Now, they are approaching Tokyo at 25,000 feet, and Lieutenant Colonel Tadashi Nakajima is about to scramble 23 Zeros to meet them. 10 of those pilots will not survive the next 14 minutes. But before the killing begins, we need to understand why this mission almost never happened. Because the greatest obstacle to the P-51 over Tokyo was not the Japanese military. It was the American military. And this is where everything nearly fell apart. January 1945, Washington, D.C. Major General Willis Hale sits in his Pentagon office and reads a proposal that makes him physically angry. Fighter escort for B-29s over Japan. Launched from Iwo Jima, an island the Marines have not yet invaded, using P-51 Mustangs flying at the absolute limit of their fuel range. He pushes the document aside. The man who wrote this proposal is Brigadier General Ernest Mickey Moore, no relation to Captain Robert Moore, the 7th Fighter Command's planning officer, who has spent 3 months calculating fuel loads, range profiles, and mission parameters. Mickey Moore believes P-51s can escort bombers to Tokyo. Willis Hale believes Mickey Moore has lost his mind. The argument is not unreasonable. The proposed mission requires P-51s to fly 660 nautical miles over open ocean with no landmarks, no emergency landing fields, no rescue capability. Navigation error of 2 degrees means missing Tokyo by 40 miles. Missing Tokyo means death in the Pacific. The fuel calculations leave zero margin. Literally zero. Every gallon accounted for. Every minute of flight time budgeted. Combat maneuvering over Tokyo would burn fuel at 3 times the cruise rate. Pilots who fight too aggressively will not make it home. Hale has commanded bomber operations in the Pacific since 1943. He has watched brave plans collapse against the reality of ocean distances. He has signed condolence letters for crews lost to fuel exhaustion. He will not approve a mission designed to produce more condolence letters. This is a suicide mission dressed in mathematics, Hale tells his staff. The fighters will run out of fuel over the Pacific. We will lose 72 aircraft and 72 trained pilots to prove a theoretical point. Request denied. Mickey Moore receives the rejection on January 11th. He does not accept it. He cannot accept it. Because the numbers from the bomber missions tell a story that demands action. December 1944. B-29. Loss rate 5.1% per mission. January 1945. The rate climbs to 5.7%. 5,500 men fly bomber missions over Japan each month. At 5.7%, that means 313 airmen killed or missing every 30 days. The bomber crews are dying in unsustainable numbers. Without fighter escort, the strategic bombing campaign will either collapse or continue at a human cost that makes victory indistinguishable from defeat. Mickey Moore needs an ally. Someone with enough authority to overrule Hale. Someone who understands that calculated risk is not the same as suicide. He finds that ally in the most unlikely place. General Curtis LeMay arrives as commander of the 21st Bomber Command on January 20th, 1945. LeMay is 38 years old, stocky, perpetually scowling, and possessed of a reputation for ruthless innovation that terrifies his subordinates and enemies in roughly equal measure. He has already revolutionized bombing tactics in Europe, developing the combat box formation that reduced B-17 losses by 30%. He has been sent to the Pacific because the B-29 campaign is failing and Washington needs results. LeMay reviews the bomber loss statistics on his first day. He says nothing for a long time. Then he asks a single question. Where are my fighters? Mickey Moore presents his escort proposal to LeMay on January 22nd. The briefing lasts 90 minutes. Moore covers fuel calculations, navigation procedures, engine management techniques, emergency protocols. He explains that P-51 pilots can extend range by leaning their fuel mixture beyond manufacturer specifications, running engines hotter than designed limits, accepting increased mechanical risk for increased distance. He shows flight test data from Wright Field, where test pilots flew P-51Ds 1,600 miles on internal and external fuel by maintaining precisely optimized power settings. The numbers work. Barely. Dangerously. But they work. LeMay listens without interrupting. When Moore finishes, LeMay asks one question. What is the expected fighter loss rate? Moore answers honestly. 5 to 8% per mission from fuel exhaustion alone. Combat losses additional. Total estimated loss rate 10 to 12% for the first missions. The room falls silent. 12% fighter losses to save bombers losing 5.7%. The mathematics seem backward. You do not solve a casualty problem by creating a larger casualty problem, but LeMay sees what Hale does not. The bomber losses are permanent and cumulative. Every mission bleeds crews. Fighter escort will reduce bomber losses dramatically, potentially below 1%. The fighter losses will decrease as pilots learn fuel management techniques and ground crews optimize engine performance. The first missions will be expensive. The 20th mission will be routine. LeMay approves the plan on January 23, 1945. He overrules Hale with 4 words: "Get me those fighters." But approval from LeMay is not the same as execution. Between January 23 and February 16, 24 days, the 7th Fighter Command must solve problems that normally require months. Iwo Jima has not been invaded yet. The invasion is scheduled for February 19th. The first escort mission is planned for February 16th, 3 days before the Marines land. This means launching fighters from a runway that Navy construction battalions must carve from volcanic rock, while Japanese artillery shells the airfield. The logistics are not merely difficult, they are insane. Ground crews work 20-hour shifts on Iwo Jima, arriving with the first Marine waves unloading fuel drums and ammunition crates while mortar rounds explode 200 yards away. Aviation engineers grade a 4,700-foot runway from volcanic ash that clogs engines and shreds tires. Fuel storage is non-existent. They stack 55-gallon drums along the taxiway and pump fuel by hand. Ammunition arrives on the same landing craft that carries Marine reinforcements. A Navy construction battalion chief named Warren Foster, a former pipeline welder from Oklahoma who joined the Seabees in 1942, coordinates the airfield preparation. Foster has built runways across the Pacific from Guadalcanal to Tinian. He has never built one under direct enemy fire with a 72-hour deadline. He does it anyway. His teams lose 11 men to Japanese shelling during construction. The runway is operational on February 15th. Rough, dangerous, barely adequate. Operational. February 16th, 1945. 0530 hours. 72 P-51 pilots attend their final briefing in a tent that shakes from artillery concussions. The mission commander reviews the flight plan one last time. Takeoff at 0545. Form up at 5,000 feet over Iwo Jima. Climb to 25,000 feet en route. Rendezvous with B-29 formation at 1340 hours over Tokyo. 15 minutes maximum combat time. 15 minutes. Every minute beyond 15 burns fuel the pilots cannot spare. Return to Iwo Jima by 1530 hours. Any pilot below 80 gallons at the 10-minute mark must disengage immediately, regardless of tactical situation. Fuel is the mission. Kill the enemy if possible. Survive if necessary. Return with your aircraft if the mathematics allow. Captain Robert Moore walks to Contrary Mary in the pre-dawn darkness. His crew chief has checked every system twice. Fuel tanks topped. Oil levels verified. Ammunition belts loaded. 6. 50 caliber machine guns, 1,880 rounds total. Moore checks his own calculations one final time. 434 gallons total fuel. Burn rate, 70 gallons per hour at cruise. 6 hours endurance. The mission requires 5 hours 45 minutes in optimal conditions. Reserve 15 minutes. Conditions will not be optimal. Moore knows this. Every pilot knows this. They climb into their cockpits anyway. The takeoff is controlled chaos. P-51s rolling down a volcanic strip barely long enough, dodging shell craters patched with crushed coral, lifting off over a beach where Marines are still fighting. Moore's wingman, Second Lieutenant James Tapp, 22 years old, 40 hours in the P-51 takes off third in his flight. His hands shake on the throttle. He has never flown a combat mission. He has never fired his guns at another aircraft. He has practiced air-to-air gunnery exactly 3 times. In Europe, pilots flew 50 training missions before their first combat sortie. Tapp got 3. This is the Pacific in 1945, where experienced pilots die faster than training commands produce replacements. The formation climbs north over 660 miles of empty Pacific. Dead reckoning navigation. No landmarks. No radio beacons. Compass heading and fuel calculations. The lead navigator, Major James Tapp, no relation to the lieutenant, carries extra radio equipment and navigation charts. An error of 2 degrees means missing Tokyo by 40 miles. Missing Tokyo means 72 pilots in the ocean. Nobody talks on the radio. Every transmission wastes concentration. Moore watches his instruments. Engine temperature normal. Oil pressure normal. Fuel flow exactly 70 gallons per hour. The Merlin engine purrs at 2,250 RPM. Smooth. Reliable. Burning through fuel with merciless precision. At 1,340 hours, the Japanese radar station at Mount Tsukuba detects them. 73 B-29 bombers at 28,000 feet. And something else. Smaller contacts. Faster. At 25,000 feet. Fighters. The radar operator double-checks his equipment. He telephones Narimasu Airfield. Lieutenant Colonel Nakajima receives the report at 1347 hours and feels the first flicker of impossible doubt. American fighters over Tokyo. He sprints to his zero. 23 aircraft scramble. Engines coughing to life. Mechanics pulling wheel chocks. Pilots strapping in. Most of these pilots have less than 50 flight hours. Half have never engaged an enemy aircraft. The veterans are dead. Guadalcanal killed them. Rabaul killed them. The Philippine Sea killed them. The Great Marianas. Turkey Shoot, where American fighters massacred Japanese naval aviation so completely that carrier operations effectively ceased, killed them. These boys learned to fly on fumes because Japan's fuel reserves dropped below critical months ago. They fly Zeros without radios, without armor, without self-sealing fuel tanks, without parachutes. Because Japanese pilots do not retreat. Nakajima leads them upward. Climbing. Climbing. The Nakajima Sake radial engine produces 940 horsepower losing power with every 1,000 feet of altitude. At 25,000 feet, the engine wheezes. The controls grow sluggish. The air thins. Nakajima scans the sky for bombers expecting the usual routine. Climb/dive, survive. He is not expecting what happens next. Captain Moore spots the Zeros at 1351 hours. 12 contacts 2,000 feet below, climbing aggressively. He keys his radio. Bandits 3 o'clock low, climbing. The formation leader orders 4 flights to engage. Moore pushes his stick forward. Speed builds. 350 miles per hour, 400, 450. The P-51 accelerates like a falling anvil. He selects his target. A Zero climbing in a lazy turn, pilot scanning upward for bombers, not expecting fighters to kill from above. Moore closes to 300 yards. The Zero pilot sees him too late. Snaps into a hard turn. Moore does not follow. He fires a 3-second burst. 180 rounds. Tracers walk across the Zero's fuselage. The unarmored fuel tank explodes. The aircraft disintegrates. Pilot dead before he processes what killed him. Moore climbs back to altitude, checks his fuel. The dive and climb burned 15 gallons. Acceptable. Barely. Across the sky over Tokyo, the pattern repeats. P-51s dive from altitude, fire, climb away. Zeros try desperately to force turning engagements where their legendary maneuverability means something. The Americans refuse. They fight with energy, with mathematics, with power-to-weight ratios, and climb rates. The Japanese fight with heart courage, willingness to die. Heart loses to horsepower. Lieutenant Tapp engages his first Zero at 1353 hours. The Japanese pilot turns hard left. Tapp follows instinctively. Terrible mistake. The Zero turns inside the P-51's radius, gains position, fires its 20mm cannon. Shells explode across Tapp's left wing. Control cables sever. Fuel lines rupture. Tapp shoves his throttle to full power and dives. The P-51's overwhelming speed advantage saves him. Maximum dive speed for a Zero 410 miles per hour. Maximum dive speed for a P-51 505 miles per hour. Tapp hits 480 in 6 seconds and pulls away. His wing is damaged. Fuel streams from punctured lines. He calculates silently. 62 gallons remaining. Distance to Iwo Jima, 660 nautical miles. He has fuel for 67 minutes. He needs 162 minutes. He will ditch 95 minutes short of safety. Survival probability approaches 0. Nakajima attacks a P-51 at 13:55 hours, with 3 years of combat experience driving his aim. He positions perfectly, closes to 200 meters, fires his 20mm cannon. The American aircraft simply accelerates away, gaining distance, climbing at an angle the Zero cannot match. Nakajima pushes his throttle to maximum. The Sake screams. His airspeed increases marginally. The American vanishes into the sun. 3 Zeros are burning wrecks falling toward Tokyo. He has been in combat for 4 minutes. At 1400, 2 hours, the B-29s drop 511 tons of incendiary bombs on the Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory and Tokyo's urban districts. Mission time over target 12 minutes. Not a single bomber touched by Japanese fighters. The P-51s have done their job. But now comes the price. Fuel gauges read critically low across the formation. Combat maneuvering has burned fuel at 3 times cruise rate. Moore checks his gauges. 85 gallons. He needs 220 to reach Iwo Jima. The mathematics say he is dead. And somewhere below Nakajima lands with 11 gallons remaining. 10 of his 23 pilots are gone. He writes his after-action report in careful characters. Enemy fighters demonstrate complete superiority above 20,000 feet. Current Japanese fighter assets cannot effectively intercept if enemy escort fighters are present. The report climbs the command chain. Staff officers read it, acknowledge it, file it. Japan does not have better fighters. Japan cannot build them. America is producing P-51s faster than Japan can produce anything. And in 3 days on February 19th, 120. Mustangs will escort the next raid. Then 172. Then more. The numbers will only grow. The kill ratio will reach 36-1. But Nakajima does not know this yet. What he knows, sitting in his cockpit with 11 gallons and 13 surviving pilots, is that the war in the sky over Japan has fundamentally changed. And in Part 3, we will see what happens when that change becomes extinction. When Japanese aircraft production collapses from 2,572 per month to 700. When training programs cease because there is no fuel to train. When the Zeros that once ruled Pacific skies are stripped of guns and loaded with explosives. Because the next phase of this war will not be fought between fighters. It will be fought between men who have been ordered to die and an enemy they can no longer reach. The kamikazes are coming, and the mathematics of desperation are the most terrifying mathematics of all. In Part 172, P-51 Mustangs launched from a half-finished runway on Iwo Jima and flew 660 miles across open ocean to Tokyo. In Part 2, they arrived over the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific and tore through 23 Japanese Zeros in 14 minutes, killing 10 pilots and losing none in air combat. Not a single B-29 bomber was touched. The kill ratio for that first mission was absolute. The mathematics were undeniable. But one mission does not win a war. One mission proves a concept. Winning requires repetition. Winning requires scale. And scaling a mission that operates at 0 fuel, margin 0 navigation error, tolerance, and 0 margin for mechanical failure across 1,320 miles of open ocean is not a concept. It is a nightmare. Japanese command received Nakajima's after-action report. They read his assessment. They understood the implications. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, the men who planned Japan's air defense felt something they had never felt before. Not fear. Worse. Helplessness. Vice Admiral Matomo Ugaki, commanding the 5th Air Fleet from Kanoya Air Base in southern Kyushu, convened an emergency meeting on February 17th, one day after the first escort mission. His intelligence officers presented the data. American single-engine fighters, positively identified as P-51 Mustangs, had engaged Japanese interceptors over Tokyo at altitudes between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. Performance assessment devastating. The P-51 outclimbed the Zero above 20,000 feet. It outdived the Zero by nearly 100 miles per hour. It refused turning combat, entirely negating the Zero's single remaining advantage. And its 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered concentrated firepower that shredded the Zero's unarmored airframe in 2-second bursts. Ugaki demanded solutions. His staff offered 3. First, develop new interceptors, the Nakajima Ki-84. Hayate and Kawasaki Ki-100 showed genuine promise against the P-51. The Ki-84 could reach 427 miles per hour and carried 2 20mm cannons. On paper, it was competitive. In reality, Japan produced only 3,514 Ki-84s across the entire war. Engine reliability was catastrophic. The Nakajima Ha-45 engine suffered chronic manufacturing defects because Japan's precision tooling industry had been degraded by material shortages. 1 in 4 Ki-84s was grounded at any given time with engine problems. The second option was concentrated anti-aircraft defense. Redirect heavy flak batteries from secondary cities to Tokyo's industrial corridors. Create kill zones at bomber altitude. This required ammunition Japan did not possess. Monthly anti-aircraft ammunition production had fallen 40% since September 1944. The third option was the one nobody wanted to say aloud. Accept that conventional interception was no longer viable and transition to special attack operations. Kamikaze. Ugaki tabled the discussion. He ordered increased fighter patrols and requested Ki-84 reinforcements from Homeland Reserve units. The reinforcements arrived in March. 14 aircraft. Japan's industrial base could not produce more. But the P-51 escort missions did not wait for Japanese countermeasures. 3 days after the first mission on February 19th, the Marines officially invaded Iwo Jima. That same day, 120 P-51s escorted B-29s back to Tokyo. Japanese fighters scrambled 41 aircraft to intercept. The Americans shot down 17 and lost 3. On February 25th, 172 P-51s flew escort. Japan lost 26 fighters. America lost 2. Each mission expanded the margin of American superiority. Each mission reduced Japan's already dwindling fighter strength. Each mission proved that the first escort was not a fluke, but a pattern. Yet inside the 7th Fighter Command, the missions were producing a crisis that threatened to stop them entirely. The fuel mathematics remained merciless. Of the 72 P-51s that flew the February 16th mission, only 61 landed at Iwo Jima with fuel remaining. 7 ditched in the ocean. 4 were rescued by Navy flying boats. 3 pilots vanished. Captain Moore crashed on the runway with 0 fuel. Lieutenant Tapp ditched 120 miles south of Iwo Jima and was rescued after 36 minutes in the water. The February 19th mission lost 5 aircraft to fuel exhaustion. The February 25th mission lost 8. Ground crews on Iwo Jima began calling the escort missions one-way tickets with a prayer for a return flight. The loss rate from fuel exhaustion alone exceeded 7%. Pilots who survived combat died in the ocean because their fuel gauges hit empty 60 miles from safety. Brigadier General Mickey Moore faced pressure from Washington. Staff officers who had opposed the escort concept from the beginning pointed to the fuel losses as vindication. The fighters are dying for nothing, they argued. The bombers can survive without escort if we increase altitude and improve formation discipline. This argument ignored the fundamental reality that bomber losses without escort ran 5.7% per mission, while losses with escort dropped to 1.2%. The escort was working, but the cost of providing it was becoming difficult to justify politically. Mickey Moore responded with engineering, not politics. He ordered 7th Fighter Command's maintenance teams to implement 3 modifications. First, seal every fuel line connection on every P-51 to eliminate the microleaks that wasted 2 to 3 gallons per mission. Second, recalibrate every fuel flow meter to ensure pilots received accurate consumption data. Third, install a crude fuel warning system, a red light on the instrument panel that activated when fuel dropped below 100 gallons, giving pilots exactly 90 minutes of warning before fuel exhaustion at cruise power. These modifications were not glamorous. They were not revolutionary. They saved lives. By March, fuel exhaustion losses dropped from 7% to 3%. By April, they fell below 1%. Engineering solved what courage could not. March 9, 1945. The mission that changes everything. Not just for the P-51 escort program, not just for the strategic bombing campaign, for the entire war in the Pacific. General Curtis LeMay has made a decision that his staff considers either brilliant or insane. He orders 334 B-29 superfortresses to bomb Tokyo at night, at low altitude, 5,000 to 9,000 feet. This is the altitude where Japanese anti-aircraft guns are most accurate. This is the altitude where Japanese fighters are most effective. This is the altitude where a B-29 becomes a massive slow target. LeMay strips the bombers of defensive guns to carry more incendiary bombs. Each aircraft hauls 7 tons of M69 incendiary clusters, jellied gasoline and white phosphorus, designed specifically to burn Japanese wood and paper construction. The night raid launches without fighter escort. P-51s cannot fly escort at night over 660 miles of ocean. But what happens on March 9th creates the conditions that make every subsequent daylight raid with full P-51 escort exponentially more devastating. 334 B-29s arrive over Tokyo at 0100 hours on March 10th. Pathfinder aircraft drop napalm markers in a giant X pattern across the Shitamachi district, Tokyo's most densely populated residential area. The following bombers unload incendiaries into the marked zone. Wind speed at ground level reaches 28 miles per hour, fanning the flames. Individual fires merge. Firestorms develop. Temperatures at the center exceed 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The Tokyo Fire Department collapses within 30 minutes. Rivers boil. Asphalt melts. Glass flows like water. 16 square miles of Tokyo burn to the ground. 100,000 civilians die in a single night. 1 million become homeless. The devastation exceeds the atomic bombing of Hiroshima in total area destroyed. LeMay loses 14 B-29s, a 4.2% loss rate. Painful, but within acceptable parameters. Japanese fighter opposition during the night raid is minimal. Most interceptors cannot find the low-flying bombers in the smoke and confusion. But the March 9th firestorm serves a strategic purpose beyond destruction. It forces Japan to disperse its remaining industrial capacity into small workshops scattered across residential neighborhoods. And dispersed production requires precision. Daylight bombing to destroy. Precision daylight bombing requires clear visibility. Clear visibility requires low to medium altitude. Low altitude requires fighter escort. The P-51 becomes indispensable. From March 10th forward, the pattern solidifies. LeMay alternates between nighttime area bombing and daytime precision strikes. The daytime missions receive full P-51 escort. 150 fighters, 200 fighters, sometimes 300. Japanese interceptors rise to meet them and are systematically destroyed. The numbers accelerate toward catastrophe for Japan. March 1945. Japanese fighter sorties against American bombers. Total 487. American P-51s shoot down 143 Japanese aircraft. Japanese fighters destroy 0 American bombers during escorted missions. April 1945. Japanese sorties drop to 314. P-51s claim 196 destroyed. The ratio is worsening because Japanese replacement pilots arrive at operational units with 30 hours of total flight time. 30 hours. An American civilian pilot earns a private license with 40 hours. Japanese fighter pilots are being sent into combat with less training than American hobbyists. They die on their first missions. They die on their second missions. The few who survive their third mission rarely survive their fourth. Nakajima watches his squadron dissolve. His unit designation, 244th Fighter Sentai, lists 24 aircraft on paper. By April, he commands 6 operational Zeros and 4 pilots capable of flying them. Fuel allocation drops to enough for 3 sorties per week. He selects missions carefully. Only when bomber formations pass directly over his airfield. Only when conditions favor a quick slash and dive. He stops sending pilots against formations with P-51 escort entirely. The mathematics are too brutal. His pilots will die achieving nothing. The Nakajima aircraft engine factory at Ota, bombed on February 16 during the first escort mission, never resumes full production. Subsequent raids hit it in March, April, and May. By April, output falls to 30% of capacity. The Mitsubishi Heavy Industries plant at Nagoya, Japan's second-largest engine manufacturer, suffers identical fate. Bombed repeatedly under P-51 escort. Production drops to 25% by May. The Kawasaki plant at Akashi burns completely in a single raid. American targeting doctrine focuses on bottleneck facilities. Destroy the engine plants, and airframe production becomes irrelevant. Japan can build fuselages. Japan can train pilots barely. Japan cannot build engines. Aircraft without engines are sculptures. Japanese total aircraft production peaks at 2,572 in September 1944. By April 1945, it falls to 1,500. By July, 700. American bomber losses drop from 5.1% in December 1944 to 1.2% in March 1945 to 0.4% by June 1945. A B-29 crew that once expected to die after 15 missions now expects to survive a full 35-mission tour. Morale transforms overnight. Crew recruitment shifts from reluctant volunteers to eager applicants. The mathematical certainty of death becomes the statistical probability of survival. The 7th Fighter Command's P-51 groups claim 877 Japanese aircraft destroyed in air combat between February and August 1945. Another 423 destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks. Total Japanese losses to P-51 operations, 1,300 aircraft. American fighter losses total 91 aircraft, 67 to ground fire, 24 to air combat. The air-to-air kill ratio finishes at 36-1. The Zero began the war with a 10-1 advantage over Allied fighters. It ends at 1-36 against the Mustang. The reversal is not gradual. It is absolute. By May 1945, orders arrive at Nakajima's airfield. Prepare for special attack operations. Kamikaze. The Zero, once Japan's supreme fighter symbol of aerial dominance, is now too obsolete for conventional combat. Its final role is as a guided missile. Load it with explosives. Point it at a target. Dive, die. Even marginal pilots can manage that. Nakajima receives the order. He understands what it means. Not just for his pilots. For Japan. The nation that built the finest carrier fighter of 1941 now uses that same fighter as a disposable weapon because it cannot compete against an aircraft designed in 117 days by a company that previously built trainers. But what happens to Nakajima himself? What happens to Captain Moore, who crash-landed on Iwo Jima with 0 fuel and a destroyed aircraft? What happens to Lieutenant Tapp, pulled from the Pacific with a concussion and broken ribs? What happens when 2 enemies meet 36 years later in a Houston hotel room, 2 old men with translators between them, and try to make sense of the 14 minutes over Tokyo that changed everything? In Part 4, we will follow these men beyond the war. We will see the final missions, the last kamikazes, the atomic bombs that ended what the P-51s had already decided. And we will hear the words, "Nakajima speaks to Moore," in 1981, the quiet admission that echoes across 4 decades of silence. You had power, you had numbers, you had fuel. We had courage, which proved insufficient. The war is nearly over, but the story has one final chapter that few people know. And it begins with a letter Nakajima writes to his wife, sealed with the careful omissions of a man who knows he has been ordered to die. A pipeline welder from Oklahoma built a runway under artillery fire. A brigadier general gambled his career on fuel calculations that left zero margin for error. 72 pilots flew 660 miles across open ocean toward a city that should have been beyond their reach. In Part 1, they launched from Iwo Jima into the impossible. In Part 2, they fought through 14 minutes of aerial combat that shattered Japanese air defense doctrine. In Part 3, we watched the P-51 escort program scale from 72 fighters to 300, systematically destroying Japan's ability to defend its own sky-collapsing aircraft production from 2,572 per month to 700 and driving the kill ratio to 36-1. The war in the air over Japan was decided, but the story of the men who decided it was not over. Because wars end on specific dates, but the people who fight them carry the war forever. And this story has a final twist that connects a burning sky over Tokyo in 1945 to a quiet hotel room in Houston in 1981, where 2 enemies sit across from each other and try to understand what those 14 minutes actually meant. Captain Robert Moore flew 37 escort missions over Japan between February and August 1945. 5 confirmed kills, 3 zeros, 1 Ki-84, 1 Ki-61. He crash-landed on Iwo Jima on that first mission with 0 fuel and a destroyed aircraft. He took off again 2 days later in a replacement P-51 and flew the second escort mission on February 19th, and the third on February 25th. And every mission after that until August 14th, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Moore returned to Texas in October 1945 with a Distinguished Flying Cross and Air Medal, with 11 oak leaf clusters, and a silence about the war that lasted 36 years. He did not speak about Tokyo. He did not speak about the zeros he shot down. He did not speak about the young pilots, American and Japanese, who died in those burning skies because they were ordered to fly, and flying was all they knew how to do. He became a crop duster. He flew a converted Stearman biplane across cotton fields in West Texas, 200 feet above the ground, a man who had fought at 30,000 feet, reduced to spraying pesticide at treetop level. His wife said he never complained. His neighbors said he rarely spoke. The war had given him everything a pilot could want: speed, altitude, purpose, and taken everything a man could lose. Lieutenant James Tapp pulled from the Pacific with a concussion and broken ribs after ditching 120 miles south of Iwo Jima, recovered in a Navy field hospital, and returned to flight status in March. He flew 14 more escort missions. He never shot down an enemy aircraft. He never needed to. By April, Japanese fighters rarely engaged P-51 formations. The mathematics had become too brutal. Tapp survived the war, returned to Ohio, completed a degree in mechanical engineering, and spent 30 years designing fuel systems for General Motors. He told an interviewer in 1990 that every fuel gauge he ever designed, he calibrated with the memory of watching his needle drop toward zero over 660 miles of empty ocean. "I designed gauges that were accurate to the tenth of a gallon," Tapp said, "because I knew what it meant when a gauge lied to you." Warren Foster, the CB pipeline welder who built the runway on Iwo Jima under Japanese shellfire, lost 11 men during construction. He never received a medal for the airfield. Construction battalions did not receive combat decorations in 1945. The Navy considered them support personnel. Foster returned to Oklahoma after the war resumed pipeline welding and never told anyone what he had built. His granddaughter discovered his service records in 2003, 2 years after his death. She found a photograph of the Iwo Jima runway dated February 15, 1945, with a handwritten note on the back. Built this in 72 hours. Lost 11 good men. Pilots don't know our names. They did not. But without Foster's runway, the 72 P-51s that changed the air war over Japan would have had nowhere to take off and nowhere to land. Lieutenant Colonel Tadashi Nakajima received orders for special attack operations in May 1945. Kamikaze. His surviving pilots, 4 men, would load their Zeros with 250-kilogram bombs and dive into American warships. Nakajima himself was assigned to lead the final sortie. He prepared methodically. He wrote his letter to his wife with the careful omissions that Japanese censorship required and Japanese honor demanded. He did not say he was going to die. He said he was going to fly one more mission. She would understand. On August 12, 1945, Nakajima's engine failed during takeoff. Mechanical failure. The Sake radial, already unreliable after years of declining manufacturing quality, seized on the runway. Nakajima climbed out of his cockpit and watched the other 3 Zeros disappear toward the American fleet. None returned. 2 days later, the Emperor announced surrender. Nakajima survived the war by engine failure. The machine that was supposed to carry him to death saved his life by breaking down. He spent the rest of his life wondering whether that was mercy or punishment. But the legacy of what happened over Tokyo extends far beyond the men who flew those missions. It reshaped how nations think about air power industrial strategy and the mathematics of war itself. The P-51 Mustang continued flying combat after World War II. When North Korean forces invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950, the first American fighters to respond were P-51s, redesignated F-51s, flown by the 35th Fighter Group from Japan. The same aircraft that had escorted B-29s over Tokyo now flew close air support over the Korean peninsula. They served until 1953, when jet fighters finally replaced them. Total P-51 combat service spanned 13 years across 2 wars. Over 60 nations eventually operated the Mustang. Israel flew P-51s during the 1948 War of Independence. The Dominican Republic kept theirs operational until 1984. The airframe that North American aviation designed in 117 days became the most widely exported American fighter in history. The escort doctrine the P-51 pioneered over Japan became the foundation of modern air combat strategy. The principle that bombers require dedicated fighter escort transformed from controversial theory to unquestioned doctrine. Every major air campaign since 1945 has incorporated fighter escort as a fundamental element. Operation Rolling Thunder over Vietnam. Operation Desert Storm over Iraq. Operation Allied Force over Serbia. The tactical framework remains identical to what Captain Moore practiced over Tokyo. Fighters establish air superiority. Bombers deliver ordnance under that umbrella. The enemy's ability to intercept is neutralized before the bombers arrive. This doctrine, born from the mathematics of B-29 losses and P-51 fuel calculations, has governed air warfare for 80 years. The engineering philosophy behind the Mustang proved equally enduring. The concept of continuous, iterative improvement, taking an existing airframe and systematically upgrading its engine, propeller, armament, fuel capacity, and aerodynamics through successive variants, became the standard model for military aircraft development. The F-16 Fighting Falcon has been upgraded through 70 variants since 1978. The B-52 Stratofortress, first flown in 1952, remains in service today through continuous modification. The principle is identical to what transformed the mediocre Allison-powered P-51A into the devastating Merlin-powered P-51D. Do not wait for perfection. Build, test, improve, repeat. American engineering culture, the culture that won the air war over Japan, operates on this principle to this day. And here is the lesson that matters most. It is not about aircraft. It is not about engines or fuel calculations or kill ratios. It is about the difference between confidence and capability. Japan entered the war with extraordinary confidence. The Zero was the finest carrier fighter in the world in 1941. Japanese pilots were the best-trained naval aviators on Earth. Their victories across the Pacific Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, built a mythology of invincibility that Japanese leadership mistook for permanent advantage. They believed superiority was a state of being, rather than a product of continuous effort. They stopped innovating because they believed innovation was unnecessary. The Zero that fought over Tokyo in February 1945 was fundamentally the same aircraft that attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941. 4 years of war. Marginal improvements. The same engine. The same armament philosophy. The same absence of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. The same beautiful, deadly, obsolete design. America entered the war with inferior fighters and poorly trained pilots. The kill ratio in 1942 favored Japan 10-1. But America possessed something Japan did not: industrial depth and the institutional willingness to admit failure and change. The P-51, with its original Allison engine, was mediocre. Rather than defending the design, American engineers replaced the engine. The Merlin transformed the aircraft. When the P-51D still lacked range for Pacific missions, engineers recalculated fuel loads, modified fuel systems, accepted operational risk, and extended the range to reach Tokyo. When fuel exhaustion losses threatened the escort program, ground crews sealed fuel lines and recalibrated gauges. Problem identified. Solution implemented. Result measured. Repeat. This is the pattern that wins. Not brilliance in a single moment, but relentless adaptation across thousands of moments. Japan had brilliant engineers. Japan had courageous pilots. Japan lacked the industrial capacity to turn brilliance into production, and the institutional flexibility to turn courage into adaptation. The result was mathematically inevitable. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. In 1981, a Japanese documentary crew arranged a meeting between Tadashi Nakajima and Robert Moore. They sat in a Houston hotel room, 2 old men, a translator between them. Nakajima was 71. Moore was 63. They had not spoken before. They had tried to kill each other 36 years earlier over a burning city. And now they sat in air-conditioned comfort, drinking hotel coffee, trying to make sense of something that defied simple explanation. Moore asked about the Zero. Nakajima described it with undisguised love. The responsiveness. The climb rate. The way it turned as if the laws of physics had made a special exception. It was beautiful, Nakajima said through the translator. In 1942, nothing in the sky could touch it. Moore nodded. He had heard this from other Japanese veterans. The Zero was a masterpiece for its moment. Then Moore asked the question the documentary crew had been waiting for. What changed? Nakajima looked at his hands for a long time. Hands that had gripped a control stick over the Solomons, the Philippines, Formosa, Tokyo. Hands that had been assigned to grip that same stick one final time in a kamikaze dive that an engine failure prevented. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. By 1945, turning did not matter. You had power. You had numbers. You had fuel. We had courage. He paused, which proved insufficient. Moore said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was the truth, and the truth required no response. 2 pilots, 2 nations, 2 philosophies of war. One built an aircraft in 117 days and improved it continuously for 5 years. The other built a masterpiece in 1939 and flew it unchanged into 1945. One adapted. One stagnated. The mathematics decided the rest. Between February and August 1945, P-51 Mustangs flew escort over Japan and claimed 1,300 Japanese aircraft destroyed. Bomber losses dropped from 5.1% to 0.4%. Approximately 4,200 American bomber crewmen who would have died under the old loss rate survived because P-51s flew above them. A pipeline welder built the runway. A brigadier general approved the mathematics. 72 pilots crossed the point of no return. And a silver fighter, designed in 117 days by a company that had never built a world-class aircraft, crossed an ocean, shattered a myth, and proved that in the mathematics of war, power beats grace, adaptation beats tradition, and engineering beats courage every single time. These pilots, American and Japanese, flew the missions their nations demanded. They deserved better than propaganda. They deserved to be remembered for what they actually did. If you know a story like this one, a moment where one decision, one innovation, one person changed the mathematics of an entire war, share it. Because these stories are not just history. They are the blueprint for how the world actually changes, not through genius alone. Through genius combined with logistics, production capacity, fuel calculations, and the unglamorous mathematics that turn impossible ideas into inevitable outcomes. The zero could still turn in August 1945. Turning did not matter. It never mattered as much as we thought. What mattered was the willingness to change when changing was the only option left. America changed. Japan could not. That difference, measured in horsepower and gallons and kill ratios, was the difference between victory and defeat. Remember that. Confidence without capability is theater. Capability without adaptation is a countdown. And the mathematics of war do not care which side has more courage. They only care which side has more power. Subscribe for more stories that prove it.